are about to experience, Jackson Snyder presents. Direct from the Vero Essene Yahad, a Hebrew Nation radio original program. JSP is a variety show seeking out Jewish and Christian origins, religion, theology and history, and doing so in a fashion that is both educational and entertaining. Welcome to Jackson Snyder Presents.
This essay is called On Jesus' Last Supper. It's another essay from Nodet, and I hope you enjoy it. Many attempts have been made to reconstruct Jesus' last days, beyond the scattered details provided by the canonical Gospels and some other sources. The main problems concern the Last Supper and the Passion narrative. Firstly, there's a calendar discrepancy, since according to John, the Friday of Jesus' crucifixion fell on the eve of Passover, Nisan 14, but for Synoptics it fell on the day of Passover, Nisan 15. Secondly, the main features of the Jewish Passover meal are the lamb, the unleavened bread, and the bitter herbs. But the Eucharistic rite described in the Synoptics, although embedded in a Passover meal, focuses on bread and wine, and the early church never used unleavened bread for the weekly rite. Thirdly, Jesus' trial before a powerless Jewish council, or Sanhedrin, Matthew 26:59, on the night of a feast seems quite awkward. Looking beyond the New Testament, we may add a fourth difficulty. At some point, the Greek-speaking church transferred the name Pesach, Passover, to a yearly commemoration of Jesus' resurrection, celebrated on a specific Sunday, while the Sunday on which the weekly rite was held used to be called the Lord's Day, Dies Dominica, and obviously had nothing to do with the annual Jewish Passover. As suggested by the description of these problems, the present essay aims to approach the Last Supper story as the key topic by focusing on two sets of data: the ritual institutions with some relevant Jewish background, and the testimonies of early Christian writers. It will be shown that tradition has reworked facts to expand their significance, especially in the Synoptics. The Synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke. Those three are called Synoptics because synoptics means seen together, and those three books have a lot in common. The written products could be termed literary icons. Now here's an old problem. The Gospels state that Jesus' Last Supper occurred on a Thursday evening after sunset, and that the crucifixion took place on the following day before sunset, but they disagree on the Passover Eve. For the Synoptics, it was on Thursday evening, but for John, it was one day later, with the Passover that year falling on a Sabbath. Many attempts were made to solve the discrepancy until the breakthrough proposed by Annie Jaubert, who proposed the use of different calendars. John followed the Babylonian lunar calendar of the temple, and the Synoptics adopted the biblical solar calendar described in the book of Jubilees. Jaubert's proposal followed the recent discovery of the Dead Sea Scrolls, some of which displayed the use of the solar calendar. One of the major features of this calendar is that the year is divided into 4 13-week quarters, with each quarter starting on a Wednesday. Consequently, the eve of Passover, the 14th of the first month, always falls on a Tuesday evening. Since, according to Jubilees, this was supposed to be the restoration of a lost biblical calendar that stressed the Sabbath rest, she endeavored to find some traces of it in the biblical narratives. Jubilees rewrites the primeval history and provides many dates. Observing that no event ever occurs on a Sabbath in this account, she successfully tried to apply the same pattern to the biblical dates in the months that are numbered and not named. Then she moved to some ancient Christian texts and discovered some signs indicating that Jesus' Last Supper took place on a Tuesday evening. This, she concluded, was the historical date of Jesus' last Passover. Her theory has been challenged, especially by Jeremias In his classical study, he first summarizes the previous attempts to solve the discrepancy. His own solution is to stick to the authority and testimony of the Synoptics and remove one by one the objections drawn from the fourth gospel. Following Schur and many others, he assumes that Rabbinic Judaism accurately reflects circumstances in Jesus' time, a view that was current before the Qumran discoveries. Thus, he doesn't accept the idea of two calendars and discards any hint of divergence among the early Christian writers. Consequently, he refuses Jaubert's hypothesis. Jeremiah's way of solving the problems raised by John looks like a string of ad hoc arguments, but on the other side, Jaubert's conclusions do indeed have some weaknesses. At least two problems should be considered, which concern the Synoptics. Firstly, they clearly put the Last Supper on Thursday evening, which doesn't match the Passover day of the solar calendar. Secondly, the bread and wine of the Eucharistic institution do not match the major elements of a traditional Passover. As a starting point, it's useless to assess the date of Jesus' death, for recent research has provided some new clues. Was Jesus crucified on Friday, 14th of Nisan, 33 A.D.? That would be April 3rd. In the official festival calendar of Judea, in use at the Jerusalem temple, Passover time was specified clearly. The slaughtering of the lambs was done between 3 and 5 p.m. on Nisan 14. That's the first month, 14. And the Passover meal began after the sunset that evening. That calendar is lunar and Babylonian. It depends on the new moons, and it has been calculated for many centuries. However, the Jewish custom was to declare a new month if the faintly glowing lunar crescent could be detected immediately after sunset at the end of the 29th of the current month. Otherwise, the new moon was declared one day later. In other words, it was known that the lunar revolution lasts about 29.5 days, so that the legal lunar month has 29 or 30 days. If for some reason the new moon could not be seen on the 29th for 2 consecutive months, they were said to be full, that is, of 30 days. And the following one was declared hollow, that is, of 29 days only, even without any observation. Briefly stated, astronomy can accurately calculate the times of the new moons, and thus the date of Passover, at least in theory. But there is still a possible inaccuracy of one day because of the uncertainty of detecting the new moon. But this uncertainty can be reduced by considering the conditions of visibility in Jerusalem and the orbital perturbations of the earth and moon. During Pilate's tenure, 26 to 36 A.D., the useful results for the date of Passover are as follows. In year 27, Thursday, April 10th, or the following day if the sky was clouded. April in 30 A.D., Friday, April 7th, or highly improbably the preceding day. In 33 A.D., Friday, April 3rd. In 34 A.D., Thursday, April 23rd. Only if a leap month was inserted at the end of the previous year because of exceptionally bad weather delaying the ripening of the barley firstfruits. The first date, Thursday, April 10th of 27, is too early. Luke 2, 1 through 2 states that John the Baptist began his ministry in the 15th year of Tiberius Caesar, that is 28 to 29 or 29 to 30 A.D., depending on the reckoning of the Seleucid era. According to John 2:20, the temple reconstruction was started 46 years before Jesus came for his first public Passover in Jerusalem. Since Herod launched the work in autumn 19 B.C., the earliest possible date is Passover of 28. The year 34 is only a remote possibility, for it falls more than a lunar month after the equinox. Moreover, it may conflict with the probable date of Paul's conversion, that is 34. So the two remaining possibilities are 30 and 33. Both match John's chronology. as well as other details in the New Testament. The equation of Jesus' death with the slaughtering of the Passover lamb is given in John 1:29, as well as in 1 Corinthians 5:7. A Talmudic saying leads to the same conclusion. Quote, on the eve of Passover, the Nazarene was crucified, literally hanged, unquote. It is stated that the Roman authorities sought to defend him. According to Jewish law, he should have been stoned, then exposed, that is, hanged. That law being found Deuteronomy 21:22 and Antiquities 4:206. This short account can't be directly dependent on the Gospels, for a list of 5 disciples is added, in which only one can be recognized, that is, Matthew. Up to now, it's been difficult to choose between 30 and 33 on literary grounds. The references given above about John Baptist and Jesus' first Passover would suggest a slight preference for 33, but scholars are still divided. One could say that it's not a major problem, but Humphreys and Waddington introduce another set of astronomical considerations, the lunar eclipses visible from Jerusalem. Obviously, such a phenomenon can only happen at the full moon, which implies that it can only be seen at night. A new calculation of the dates of these eclipses, which takes into account the effects of long-term changes in the Earth's rate of rotation, gives a striking result. Out of 12 such eclipses that occurred during Pilate's tenure, only one falls on a Passover day, in 33 A.D., in 33 A.D., in 33 A.D., in 33 A.D. It occurred at moonrise, that is immediately after sunset, and had a 60% magnitude. More accurately, it started below the horizon at 3:40 p.m., reached a maximum at 5:15 p.m., and finished at 6:50 p.m. The rising moon could be seen from Jerusalem at 6:20 p.m. with the shaded area. You get the significance of that? Let's go on. Now, in his Pentecostal speech, Acts 2:20, Peter quotes the eschatological prophecy of Joel 3:1-5, which includes the following: the sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the day of Yahweh comes, unquote. It's been shown that this refers to both eclipses, solar and lunar. Ancient writers used to describe the latter as moon suffused with the color of blood. Indeed, this is the way its shaded area appears, especially when it's low on the horizon. Of course, prophecy is a poetic view, but both types of eclipses can't happen on the same day. Moreover, the main point of the quotation is the pouring out of Yahweh's Spirit. In Revelation 6:12, when the Lamb opens the 6th seal, the seer says, there was a great earthquake. The sun became black as sackcloth. The full moon became like blood. Here there's an allusion to Isaiah 13:10 and possibly 53, somewhat rewritten. The sun will be dark at its rising, and the moon will not shed its light. Again, we have the two eclipses at the same time. In Matthew 24:29, Jesus says that before the appearance of the Son of Man, quote, the sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the skies, unquote. All the ancient writers who comment on the prophecies make the connection with the passage of the Son of Man and with all the signs mentioned in the Gospels at Jesus' death. Matthew 27:45, 51. Darkness all over the land, rent, curtain, earthquake, resurrection of the saints. The darkness may refer in general to the two eclipses of the ancient prophecies, but Luke 23:45 specified an eclipse of the sun, which explains the darkness. No ancient authority knows of any independent tradition on an eclipse of the moon. However, an eclipse at a Passover moonrise, at the very beginning of the feast, is a very rare phenomenon, albeit of limited scope. If it occurred immediately after Jesus' death, it may have been viewed as a heavenly harbinger, later developed into a full-scale apocalyptic picture, perhaps in connection with the destruction of Jerusalem, since Josephus himself gives numerous signs and oracles to this effect, for instance in War 6, 288 to 315. No more can be said in support of the year 33. As for the eclipse of the sun in Luke 23, we shall see another possible explanation. Now we go to the solar calendar of the Book of Jubilees and its authority. Before reassessing Jaubert's hypothesis, it's necessary to discuss the non-lunar calendar of the Book of Jubilees, Yovolim. The Greek fathers knew of this little book as Little Genesis. The Greek version is lost, but it was the source of a Latin translation, which survives in several quotations, as well as an Ethiopian translation titled The Book of the Division of Times. In his major study, R. Charles has shown that the original work was written in Hebrew, a conclusion confirmed by some fragments unearthed from the Qumran caves. The book rewrites the stories of Genesis, with some omissions and changes. Various details from Exodus to Deuteronomy are added. The chronological frame is a kind of solar year of 364 days. This according to Jubilees 6:33 to 38. And the history of the world is computed in periods of 50 years between Jubilees. The days are reckoned from the morning, which is the lunar calendar. They start in the evening, for the new month begins at sunset. The lunar rhythm of the months is ignored, but nothing is said of the adjustments necessary to match the actual natural year. Charles connected the work to the Pharisees and dated it to the period following the Maccabean crisis in 2nd century BC. The Damascus document, a Hebrew text first discovered sometime before 1900 in the Geniza of the Karaite synagogue in Cairo, cites as an authority this very book of the division of times, finding that in CD 16, 2-4. CD is the Damascus document. It is stated that Israel has corrupted the Sabbaths and festivals and forgotten the secrets. CD 13, 14-15. A new community called the Covenant has been created or sponsored by a teacher of righteousness. CD 1, 7-10. According to CD 3, 18-4, it includes priests, Levites, sons of Zadok, and candidates, or foreigners, with a reference to Ezekiel 44:15, quoted as, the priests and the Levites and the sons of Zadok. Obviously, this covenant followed the book referred to, but the commentators were at a loss, since the only sons of Zadok known at that time were the Sadducees of Josephus and the New Testament, who could hardly be taken as faithful heirs of any kind of Pharisees. The Qumran caves have delivered fragments of these two texts, as well as of many others in which the same calendar is in use. Some calendrical documents from the Qumran Cave 4 describe the service cycle of the priestly courses and give the dates of the major festivals. The introduction of one text refers to the creation week, 4Q 320, verses 1-3, quote, to its being seen from the east to shine in the middle of the heaven at the foundation of creation from evening until morning on the fourth day of the week, unquote. Indeed, in Genesis 1:16 we read, the greater light to rule the day, and the lesser light to rule the night. This means that the creation work started with a full moon. Moreover, every day of that week includes a piece of creation, an evening, and a morning. In other words, the days are reckoned from the morning, a fact which is not consistent with the lunar calendar. Thus, the main point of that introduction is to stress that the lunar calendar, which focuses on the new moon, is unbiblical.
Say that again, will you? What is unbiblical?
Thus, the main point of that introduction is to stress that the lunar calendar, which focuses on the new moon, is unbiblical. The year contains 364 days divided into 4 quarters, starting with the solstices and equinoxes. Rabbinic tradition knows these divisions and states that each one spans 91 days and 7.5 hours. Thus, this astral year has 365.25 days, which matches the Julian calendar. We don't know how the solar calendar was adjusted to the solar year, which is longer by 1.25 days. 2 possibilities were at hand depending on the way of keeping the Sabbath cycles. A simple calculation shows that by adding 7 weeks over 28 years, the discrepancy with the solar year is canceled out. Another possibility is to add 1 or 2 days every year, that is, to have some longer weeks or blank days. Some texts suggest such a correction. The corruption of the Sabbaths and festivals, cited above, points to a calendar problem in both cases, and not to a problem in the details of the rites. According to CD 10, 14 through 17, all work should be interrupted on Friday before sunset, which is not a dissonant view, but in 3, 12 through 16, it is said that the Sabbath belongs to the hidden things, implying that, from time to time, a week was longer by 1 day, according to some calendrical decision or secret computing. An obscure passage of 1 Enoch can be understood this way. In 1 Enoch 74:12 we read, "The sun and the stars bring in all the year exactly, so that they do not advance or delay their position by a single day." This shows that there was a corrective system that worked. However, the next chapter, Chapter 75, speaks of, quote, "the 4 days which are not reckoned in the reckoning of the year, which have been understood as the 4 91st days at the end of each quarter, causing an error of 4 days every year and awkward problems for the festival calendar." This contradiction between the 2 chapters is blatant. It seems like a translator or copyist has mixed up these days with some additional days fixing the solar year. Another hint is given in Jubilees 50, 1 through 5. The Jubilee falls on the 50th year, after the 7th sabbatical year, and then a new cycle begins. So the rhythm of the 7th years is broken. Whatever the intercalation system used, both calendars match every 28 years, on average, because of possible lunar leap years. The solar calendar has worked at least for some time, and rabbinic tradition displays some knowledge of it. There is a blessing of the sun every 28 years. When the equinox falls on a Tuesday at sunset, recalling the creation week, this view depends on an interpretation of that week according to the traditional lunar calendar, with Wednesday beginning on Tuesday evening. In fact, this explanation is secondary, for the interesting point is that the rite is performed at sunrise, facing east, which fits the solar calendar. The Feast of Booths provides another clue. According to M. Sukkah 5:6, the people should say, when the procession reaches the eastern gate of the temple, "Our fathers, when they were at this place, their backs were toward the temple and their faces toward the east to the sun." Ezekiel 8:16. "And we, our eyes are toward Elohim," that is, westward, toward the temple, unquote. The context of the quotation speaks of 25 wicked men standing in the inner court, but the saying puts "our fathers" instead. They are criticized, but the worshippers, at least some of them, witness a change in rite.
You may contact us at Jackson Snyder Presents at this email address, veroyahad@gmail.com. That is veroyahad@gmail.com. And let me remind you, you are listening to Jackson Snyder Presents with your host tonight, Bogdan G. Schruumkoff. Thank you for listening. We'll be right back. Jackson Snyder Present is back. Join us now for more of this interesting discussion.
The context of the quotation speaks of 25 wicked men standing in the inner court, but the saying puts our fathers instead. They are criticized, but the worshippers, at least some of them, witness a change in rite. In fact, rabbinic tradition has inherited from both Pharisee and Essene traditions, and it is well known that for their first prayer in the morning, the latter faced the rising sun, that is the Essene, which we find in War 2, 128 and 148. It's also well known that the Therapeutai had a similar rite every 50th day. This according to Philo. We learn from M. Rosh Hashanah 2:9 that to the end of the 1st century A.D., Rabbi Gamaliel, the head of the Rabbinic Academy, told a sage to desecrate the Day of Atonement, which he had computed, that is, at a non-lunar date. Another story is instructive. In Batanea, on the Golan Heights, Herod the Great created a peaceful settlement and installed there a group of Babylonian Jews who had been living in Syria. He gave them lands to break in and exempted them from taxes. Their leader, Zamaris, built a town, Bathira, and several strongholds, according to Antiquities 17:23 and following. Concerning this town, rabbinic tradition reports the following event. It happened once that Nisan 14 fell on a Sabbath, and the elders of Bathira did not know if the preparation of the Passover sacrifice should take precedence over the Sabbath rest or not. They asked Hillel, a Babylonian, who didn't know either, but he eventually remembered the teaching he had heard in Judea. Then he was proclaimed patriarch. The query itself is odd, for according to the lunar calendar, Passover falls on a Sabbath every 7 years. That can't be. It's difficult to imagine that such a major festival could have been forgotten by the founding body of rabbinic tradition. Now Herod persecuted the Pharisees, but he loved the Essenes. Josephus says that many religious Jews settled at Bathira, for they felt secure there. In other words, some Essenes were there and brought in their calendar and their Passover on Tuesday evening. For them, of course, the feast could never occur on a Sabbath. Moreover, they had a custom of eating the Passover lamb everywhere in the land of Israel, and it makes sense that a Babylonian could be ignorant of how to proceed. This story tells us that at some point they had to switch to the lunar calendar. To sum it up, the solar calendar was in use at the end of the Second Temple period. According to Jubilees, it was of biblical origin, but it had been lost or forgotten by the majority of Jews. Why was it lost or forgotten? Let me add a little something. Because of the takeover of the whole temple system in the 2nd century BC, just before the Maccabean revolt, and the calendar was changed by the order of the little horn, who forced the temple to get on the Greek lunisolar calendar and abandon the original calendar, which they, including the Maccabees, were happy to do, because that Greek calendar that they adopted followed the economy of the Greeks. And so, with the lunisolar calendar, they could manipulate it to some extent to make sure their market days and the Greek days were the same. And that's what happened to the Zadokite calendar and why it had been lost by the majority of Jews. But look, it wasn't lost by all of them. As this author just said, it would be used until the end of the Second Temple period. That's in the days of Yeshua, but it was not used in the temple. They were using a moon calendar. The Pharisees were using a different moon calendar. The Essenes and Nazarenes, Ebionites, all those other Essenic Enochians, they were still using the same calendar as they had used in Solomon's temple and in the tabernacle. The same calendar that Yahweh put the sons of Zadok in charge of for eternity. Take a look at Ezekiel chapter 44. Let us continue. Annie Jaubert's breakthrough was the solar biblical calendar. At the beginning of the study of the Qumran documents, before the solar calendar of the Jubilees had been seriously considered, a calendrical problem occurred. The date of Pentecost, also called the Feast of Weeks, was consistently noted to be Sunday, the 15th day of the third month. This major festival included a renewal of the Sinaitic covenant and the admission of neophytes. According to Leviticus 23:15 through 16, it falls on the day following the completion of the 7 full weeks, counted from the day after the Sabbath of the wave offering of the barley sheaf, first fruits. So if Pentecost occurs on the third month, 15th day, the 7 weeks begin on Sunday, the first month, 26th day. For mainstream Jewish custom, the day before a Sabbath was the very day of Passover. That is Nisan the 15th, according to the ancient meaning of the term. See Deuteronomy 5:12-15. The discrepancy could be solved thanks to a Persian writer, al-Biruni, we talked about him before, of the 11th century A.D. In a book on astronomy and calendars, he mentioned a Jewish sect called the Magariya, the cave dwellers in Arabic, who insisted that the year begin on a Wednesday. The sect was given that name because of the finding of its documents in the Qumran caves in the 7th century A.D. With this information, the problem is resolved, since the 26th of the first month always falls on the Sunday that follows the week of unleavened bread. So, the Covenanters, a.k.a. the Magariya, a.k.a. the cavemen, were using the solar calendar of Jubilees, a conclusion that was later confirmed by other documents. Then came Jaubert, who started from the hypothesis that the solar calendar was once a biblical feature before being dropped at a later stage. She first observed in the narrative of Jubilees that the numerous dated activities or travels never occurred on the 4th of the first month, nor on the 11th of the same month, and so on from week to week. Taking these to be Sabbath, she found that the beginning of the year, month 1, day 1, always fell on a Wednesday, thus independently confirming al-Biruni's statement. It appeared, too, that the significant events always occurred on a Sunday, a Wednesday, or a Friday. Then she proceeded to look for signs of such a calendar in 2 directions, in the Bible and in early Christian writings. Events in the biblical narratives are less often dated than in Jubilees, but for those given with numbered unnamed months, the pattern of Sabbaths and special days applies, especially in the Hexateuch and in Ezekiel. Hexateuch, that's the first 6 books of the Bible, the Torah plus Joshua. Let me say that again. Events in the biblical narratives are less often dated than in Jubilees. Yeah, Jubilees is full of dates. But for those given with numbered, unnamed months, the pattern of Sabbath and special days applies, especially in the Hexateuch and Ezekiel. It is a feature that may have existed before any systematic calendar. This general view has been accepted by biblical scholars, but with some reservations for the special days. These observations can be strengthened by other details. The Creation Week, discussed above, launches a non-lunar calendar in which the days begin in the evening. However, in the definition of the days of the cultic calendar, they begin in the morning. For example, the Passover lamb must be slaughtered on the 14th of the first month and eaten in the evening. And the Israelites were brought out from Egypt that very day, unquote, which was the night of the 14th, according to Exodus 12:6-17. The Day of Atonement falls on the 10th of the 7th month, but begins on the eve of the 9th day. So for the Day of Atonement, that is going to start at sundown, but every other one starts at sunup. This implies a reckoning of the days from the morning, for otherwise it would start one day before. According to Leviticus 22, 29 through 30, the sacrifices of thanksgiving shall be eaten on the same day without leaving any of it until morning. So the day includes the following night. Indeed, this was the rule at the Jerusalem temple. Any cleansing that was performed by daylight only took effect after sunset on the same day. Numbers 19:7. Other passages suggest the same definition of the day. Al-Baruni adds that for the Makkariya, the beginning of the first month is a Wednesday with a full moon. But this can't be true, at least not every year. But it is clearly true for the creation week. On the fourth day of the first year, the lesser luminary was a full moon. Wednesday. It seems that Al-Baruni was aware of general introduction like that of 4Q320 quoted above. As for the thesis of a hidden calendar, it should first be noted that the most common Hebrew word for month is Kodesh, whose natural meaning is new. That is, quote, new moon. However, we do reckon that it is not new moon, but new month, because moon is not even in there. Though Nodet says that any other meaning is a distortion, but new moon. Now, at the time of the Exodus from Egypt, a new calendar was introduced, according to Exodus 12:2. This month shall be for you the beginning of the months. Rabbinic tradition understands that this reckoning from Nisan gives the dating of the festivals and the kings, while the creation year begins at Tishri, 6 months later, according to Rosh Hashanah 1:1. All according to the lunar calendar with its Babylonian month names. But the night of the first Passover in Egypt and the departure of the Israelites occurred in full darkness. Exodus 12:29, which is to say, at the time of a new moon. Elsewhere, it is said that Passover has to be celebrated, quote, at the appointed time in the month of Aviv, but can be better understood as at the appointed time at the new moon of Aviv, especially since both passages state that the feast is a memorial of the departure from Egypt. The moon signals the specific time, see Genesis 1:14, but as in the case of the creation week, the plain meaning refers only to the first year and no explanation is given for any adjustment in the following years. Something is hidden or never existed. Later in the Hellenistic and Roman periods, the Babylonian lunar calendar prevailed, but we don't know when and how the calendrical change was enforced. Anyhow, the purpose of both Jubilees and the Cairo document, CD, makes sense, although we do not know which secret tradition lies behind them. Annie Jaubert is right. It is a solar calendar, but her discovery was not at all obvious. In fact, one may wonder whether this biblical calendar ever was in use. Because of the lack of an adjustment device, the texts cited for creation and Passover focus only on the first year. Oh, there is such an easy solution to this. I think the next thing I'm going to do on the calendar is talk about proposed solutions to finding the first day of each year. Just this week I've read several propositions, but only one comes close to the proposition I have concerning how to keep the calendar in the procession of seasons correctly and not have to intercalate, unless you call intercalating putting those 4 special days into the Enochian calendar. So Annie Jaubert, she made a breakthrough, the date of the Last Supper. The second part of Jaubert's study deals with ancient Christian liturgy. With respect to the special days, the Didache prescribes a fast on Wednesdays and Fridays, Didache 8:1, and the congregation convenes on Sundays, or the Lord's Day. I think we could certainly argue that. Again, this is for the ancient Christian church, not for so-called Jewish Christians. Sunday was called the Lord's Day. In Justin's apology, 1.67.7, or we might say the Day of Yahweh. Early traditions concur on the three important days of the old Jubilees calendar. Pentecost falls on Sunday, but its dating depends on, here the writer has Easter. I guess again he's talking about the Christian calendar, which falls on the Sunday that follows the first full moon after the vernal equinox. So it seems that both calendars are mixed up, but the older one did not disappear. This suggests that Jesus and the early Christians had some connections with groups using the Jubilee calendar, and so Jesus would have celebrated his last Passover on a Tuesday evening. The discrepancy between the two Passover dates is, to some extent, reflected in the anointing at Bethany. According to Matthew 26:2 and Mark 14:1, it occurred 2 days before Passover, but in John 12:1, it was 6 days before. Other traditions provide additional clues. The Didaskalia Apostolorum is a Syriac work written about 200 AD in a Jewish Christian milieu quite removed from the Greek New Testament, especially from Paul. The text has been poorly transmitted, but it witnesses some narratives and customs independently from the Gospels. Concerning the days of fasting, it states that Jesus was arrested on a Wednesday. This is the Didaskalia 21.14.5 through 18 and 17.7 through 8 and 19.2. One of these passages is blurred by a tradition of fasting on Monday and strives to explain that the Passover had been brought forward by the Jewish authorities that year out of fear of the crowd. Does this imply that the crowd was not using the official temple calendar at all, which had the Passover on some other day, not Tuesday? I think so. The fast mentioned in Matthew 15 is in a longer form. Quote, "The days will come when the bridegroom is taken away from them, and then they will fast in those days." The addition is witnessed by the Western text and Luke 5:35. The plural form alludes to Wednesday and Friday. The parallel passage in Mark 2:20 has a singular "in that day," which suggests a reduction of the fasting to Friday only. Epiphanius of Salamis 3:15-403, though sometimes confusing but often helpful because of his uncritical way of putting sources together, gives various traditions. He knows the Didaskalia, and in the same way says that Jesus was arrested on the Wednesday and crucified on the Friday without noticing that this contradicts the Gospels. In another fragment, he indicates that the performance of a customary rite in the Passion Week on Thursday at the 9th hour, quote, as a memorial of the breaking of bread. This could be close to the chronology of the Synoptics, but he insists that Jesus was not arrested the following night. At some point, the authority of the canonical gospel elicited some changes in these traditions. Patriarch Peter of Alexandria, 300-311, speaks of 2 fasting days and explains that Wednesday commemorates the plotting of the Jews with Judas. The Apostolic Constitutions says, too, that the fast on Wednesday recalls Judas' betrayal. In 5:15 and 7:23, in 5:14, the author was forced to say that Jesus held 2 suppers, on Tuesday when he foretold Judas' betrayal, and on Thursday when he ate the Passover lamb and instituted the Eucharist. Other scraps of tradition go the same way. The Gospels eventually prevail, but earlier traditions can be traced over quite a long period. From all this material, Annie Jaubert concludes that the views of John and the Synoptics cannot be merged, for they use different calendars. The former, that is John, follows the lunar calendar of the temple. The latter, the Synoptics, use the solar calendar. So the last Passover meal was held on Tuesday evening, unconnected with the temple festival and its huge crowds of pilgrims. Important. important. Yahshua was not on the temple calendar, and neither were the synoptic writers, the evangelists, at least not three of them. Three were on the solar calendar. This is very important. For Josephus, according to War 6:423, and the rabbinic tradition, the slaughtering of the Passover lambs had to be done in the temple, because that was the procedure of Josiah's Passover, according to 2 Chronicles 35, 1-14. But other customs are mentioned, especially in Galilee. For Al-Biruni's cave dwellers, it simply has to be performed within the land of Israel. A Passover celebration was practiced by some Christians, of whom the best known are the Quartodecimans. Their name indicates that they were celebrating Passover on Nisan 14. They used to celebrate the Passover according to the Gospel, in keeping with the tradition of John and his disciple Polycarp, the bishop of Smyrna. Their Passover was held at night, and it lasted until 3 a.m. That is, immediately after the Jewish Passover meal. Epiphanius, in his Panarion, knew of them and adds that during that meal they fasted for those among their Jewish brothers who did not believe in Yahshua. Following the Jewish expectation that the Messiah would come during the Passover night, they awaited the return of Jesus in the middle of the night. In fact, the main feature of the fast was abstention from the Passover lamb, since Jesus had brought an end to celebrating Passover on earth. And this author cites Luke 22:15-16. Such a rite matches the fourth gospel, its lunar calendar, and the hope that Jesus would return shortly after his death, but it's hard to reconcile with the Synoptics and with the Passover commemoration before the crucifixion. Traces of that solar calendar can be found in the Synoptics if we look closely. Besides the discrepancy of the Passover date following the anointing at Bethany, further synoptic evidence for the solar calendar can be detected. The most remarkable instance of this is the mention of a solar eclipse at the 6th hour in Luke 23:45. The parallels speak only of darkness over all the earth, or land. Matthew 27:45, Mark 15:33. A solar eclipse implies it was the day of a new moon. But in the sequel, after Jesus' burial, Luke 23:54 has, it was the day of preparation and the Sabbath was dawning. This would indicate that the moonrise occurred on the very beginning of the Sabbath, immediately after sunset, at the time of a full moon, in a way that exactly matches the Passover day according to the lunar calendar and the Johannine chronology. The Persian sage Ephrahat, an Assyrian writer of the 4th century, who used only the lunar calendar, uses a typical phrase when he referring to the Exodus Passover as, quote, the light which enlightens the 15th. That's on his demonstration of the Passover, paragraph 6-7. In his view, this is a full moon, which cannot be reconciled with the darkness of the departure from Egypt. The undeniable conclusion is that the solar eclipse is a literary device, which may have been prompted by two somewhat interrelated considerations. First, an apocalyptic development of the lunar eclipse mentioned above, and a reminder of the full moon of the solar calendar, at least for the first year. Thus, the eclipse would suggest a transition toward the beginning of a new creation, starting with a full moon. If this were an isolated finding, it would not be very significant, but more evidence can be found. In Luke 6:1, the Western text displays an interesting variant. This is it, on a Sabbath. Then the Western text adds Tutor protos, which means second first. On a Sabbath, second first, when he was going through the grain fields, his disciples plucked and ate some heads of grain, rubbing them in their hands. The Western text variant is clearly a lectio difficilior, which should be preferred, for its removal as meaningless by other copyists made sense. Nevertheless, an explanation has been suggested, which involves the Jubilees calendar. The counting of the weeks for Pentecost starts from the second Sabbath after Passover, first month, 25th day, so that it could be termed second first. This solution is ingenious, but the date is too early for the wheat crop. Now, an Essene variant of that calendar includes a row of Pentecosts, that is 7-week periods, corresponding to the first fruits of the wheat with an offering of bread, of the grapes, new wine, and of the olives for oil. In such a system, second first can easily be understood as the first Sabbath of the second Pentecostal cycle, when the wheat crop is available after the first Pentecost rite. Thus, an eschatological meaning appears. The new crop symbolizes the new kingdom, in which all the days are holy in the same way. A trace of that very calendar can also be noted in Acts 2:13. In the Pentecost narrative, some take to mocking the apostles, saying, they are filled with new wine. Then Peter replies in verse 15, these men are not drunk, since it's only the third hour of the day. This new wine cannot be available before the grape harvest, some 2 months after the normal Pentecost. Incidentally, the timing indicated in Acts 2:1 is strange. It says, it happened when the day of Pentecost was being fulfilled, Luke 9:51. The verb denotes a process close to completion, and omitting it would make the phrase clearer in its actual context. Rather than it happened when the day of Pentecost was being fulfilled, rather on the day of Pentecost, without the rest. Indeed, the Western text has a plural, when the days were being fulfilled, which provides a glimpse of an earlier meaning, a Pentecostal period during which new wine is drunk. In other words, this alludes to a second Pentecost period. I think we talked about this before as a Pentecontad. Moreover, Peter's speech has an eschatological meaning, especially with the quotation of Joel mentioned above, and this wine may have had a ritual meaning to the same effect. The eschatological meal in 1 Q-Serek 2, 11 through 22, with the two messiahs, son of Aaron and the son of David, and all the tribes, shows the Messiah, son of Aaron, opening it with a blessing of the first fruits of bread and wine. It's noteworthy that all the instances discussed above belong to Luke Acts. So there are some pending problems. In all four Gospels, the Passion narrative spans one full day, from Thursday at sunset to Friday at sunset, and displays a significant concentration of events. The fourth Gospel, however, entails only one major issue, the twofold trial of Jesus before Pilate, consisting of a first session in the Praetorium, John 18:28, which concludes with a scourging, and then a second session at a place called Gabbatha, John 19:13. In other respects, the Jewish context is consistent, including the absence of a competent Sanhedrin, because from the time of Coponius, the first prefect of Judea, from around 6 AD, all the power was concentrated in the hands of the Roman ruler. The Jewish authorities were reduced to a council around the high priest, whose authority concerned only temple matters. Even the priestly garments and ornaments for the festivals were controlled by the Romans, according to Antiquities 1893. As for the chronology of the fourth Gospel, the crucifixion occurs on the eve of the Sabbath, on which Passover fell that year, at precisely the time of the slaughtering of the Passover lambs, a fact which developed into the full-scale symbol of Jesus as a slain lamb. In 1 Corinthians 5:7, Paul speaks of the sacrificed Christ, our Passover lamb. Justin Martyr gives a precise description in Dialogues 43. When the lamb is roasted, it is arranged in such a way as to represent the cross. A spit goes right through it from the lower limbs to the head. Another spit is at the shoulder to which the paws are fastened. Unquote. This custom is attested by rabbinic sources, for we read in M-Pes, I don't know what that is, 7-1, I guess Pesach, that the lamb is to be roasted on a spit of dry wood. Damp wood would give off steam with an effect similar to that of boiling, whereas a metal spit heated up in the fire would play a part in cooking the meat. The entrails and internal organs would be cooked in a pot and not roasted directly over the fire. For this reason, Rabbi Akiva requires them to be fastened on another branch fixed to the paws. In other words, there has to be a second transverse spit forming a cross with the first. Thus, it was very simple to identify Jesus with the Paschal Lamb. Regarding the Synoptics, taken together, the position is more complicated. Even if Jesus had eaten his last Passover meal on a Tuesday evening, one must explain why it was then transferred to Thursday, in spite of the persistence of some traditions connected with the original date. Besides this calendrical problem, the Synoptic accounts are filled with features that are, for the most part, at odds with the historical reality and Jewish legal prescriptions, including the trial before a powerless Sanhedrin in the middle of the feast, the release of Bar Abbas after the Passover meal, whereas he should have been able to take part in it, Simon of Cyrene returning from the working in the fields during the feast, Luke 23:26, and so on. The strange features of the Eucharistic institution have been alluded to above. Prominent among them is the single cup of wine for all, as this cannot be compared with the 4 cups of wine prescribed by rabbinic tradition for the Passover meal. Moreover, it's expounded that the festival was to be celebrated by eating meat, Deuteronomy 12:18, when the temple was extant, but after its destruction, wine was to be used instead. Look at that. See Judges 9:13. In any case, the most ancient tradition is certainly the one given in 1 Corinthians 11:23, where it is written, "The Lord Jesus on the night when he was delivered." The same wording is found in the ancient canonical liturgical texts like the Apostolic Confessions and the Apostolic Tradition. These texts are remarkable for the fact that they do not mention Passover. Neither do they state that this occurred the day before his death. These issues obviously require further studies. In the Gospels, Jesus' Last Supper involves custom and legal issues, chronological discrepancies between the Synoptics and John, a mock trial before the Sanhedrin, 2 trials before Pilate in John, and so on. This study focuses on the calendar problem, a topic of utmost importance in ancient Judaism, and follows Annie Jaubert's hypothesis against Joachim Jeremiah's now classical view. The Synoptics display a somewhat loose connection with the Jubilees sectarian calendar, while John's chronology seems to be more historically accurate. And that is the end of Etienne Nodet's essay on Jesus' Last Supper. That essay is packed with information. All we really need to do now, if we're going to stay hot on the trail of this calendar, is let's all get together, break this down, understand it better. But my friends, we cannot get together, not in the flesh anyway. And I think, though, a lot of people download these calendar studies, I'm beginning to wonder why. Thank you for listening. This is Jackson Snyder with Jackson Snyder Presents Thinking Believer on behalf of the Vero Essene Yahad and New Earth Restoration online Shabbat services. You have been listening to Jackson Snyder Presents on Hebrew Nation Radio.